And I looked at it and
Yeah.
thought, gosh, I want to experience so much more love in my life. I know I have so much more significance and purpose, and I just knew where I was not it. And I could see how
Yeah.
much I didn't want to be in such a low place of like feeling so bad about myself all the time.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Thrive Over Survive. And I'm here joined with my amazing friend and mentor, Alex, who is a business and success coach. But today she's going to share with us her personal story of how she went from an abusive relationship to a thriving multi-six-figure coaching business, owning a multi-six-figure coaching business to help women become unapologetic in who they are, which I think is so valuable for all of us listening who are going through our survival, who are in survival mode, trying to get to thriving and feeling like they're thriving after an abusive relationship. So, Alex, I don't want to like share too much of your story or too much of your intro. I want you to be able to
Sure.
explain to the viewers who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into your story.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm so glad you had me here today, Emma. I'm really excited for our conversation. And Emma is a dear friend of mine as well, for everyone listening. So I'm super excited to be here having these conversations. And so, what I do, as Emma said, I am a business and success coach. And sometimes I'll even say an unapologetic living coach as well, because I love
Mhm.
helping women really step into finding their authentic voice, becoming unapologetic in who they are and who they really are, not who other people have told them to be or based from fear, but really owning the authentic truth of who you are. And I personally believe that every single one of us is born with greatness inside of us. And so I help women access that internal greatness and bring it out so that you can make more money in your business, make significant leaps in revenue, work with more clients that you love, and elevate yourself into a higher role so that you're actually experiencing thriving and abundance and a lot more joy in your business over grind and stress and fear and doubt, which I know both of those journeys very well. So, from my own
Yeah.
journey of going from the surviving and struggle into the thriving, I now guide women in that through my own personal experience.
Yes, she was the one who helped me when I first started my business. And I was seriously, seriously struggling with the mindset piece, the people pleasing, the self doubt, the self love of just, you know, getting through all the head crap of, I would say like head crap or head trauma, whatever you want to call it,
Sure.
of just like, how am I going to start this business when I just went through this traumatic event and I don't trust myself? Which we'll get into that. I want you to share your story, a little bit more of your personal story of
Yeah.
what you went through. Because you have a couple of different things that you went through to get to starting your business. A lot that you've overcome that I think is really inspirational for the
Mm.
listeners to hear and understand the transformation that you made happen in your own
Mm.
life. Because I think it's really inspiring.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Emma. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. So my experience is a little different in that my relationship, the toxic relationship I experienced, was over 10, 11 years ago. So there was a several year period between me leaving the relationship and starting my business. However, I'll start with just the relationship first, and then we'll get into
Yeah.
how that led to the business journey. But
Right.
yeah, so I was 23 years old. I was living in Los Angeles. For years leading up to that point, had wanted to work in the film industry. I mean, since I was like 12 years old, I had dreams of moving out to LA, becoming a producer, working in film. And so I'd been in LA for a little over a year, I think a year and a half, and I was starting to have success in film. Had been working my way into a couple of different big pictures. Still, I mean, working as a production or producer's assistant, so still at the bottom of the totem pole, but I was starting to see some success.
There's not many people who can say that they've been in that industry, I feel like.
Well,
So
there you go.
it's a success to deal with all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I look back now and can say, hey, I moved out there. I didn't really know hardly anyone. And so I kind of clawed my way into the industry. Um, and so I, at the time, at 23, was actually feeling pretty great about what I'd accomplished at that point. Um, and so I think it was, yeah, actually, while I was working on the movie Inception, which was the first big feature film I got to work on as a PA,
Yeah.
I was also working at a restaurant part-time, which I'd been doing in between different film jobs. And so at that time, I ended up through the restaurant, met this man, my ex, and I was kind of swept off my feet. I was this 23-year-old, like wide-eyed, trying to make my way in LA, girl. And I meet this man who's 13 years older than me. He's a really successful entrepreneur. He's kind of a pseudo celebrity in his town because he wasn't from LA, but so a pseudo celebrity in his town, and he wanted to date me. And I remember, and at that time I'll say, well, I was in LA. I hadn't dated a lot. I was so focused on breaking into film, and the people I was meeting, I just wasn't really into. And so at that time, I felt like, wow, I can't believe he's choosing me. Like, who am I, that this really successful man is so interested in me. And so we started dating. And the interesting thing about this that I never even fully realized until a couple years ago was that when we went out on our first date, I actually can remember that there was some point where he was sharing and talking about things that I wasn't really interested in. And I remember feeling like I didn't get to share a lot. Like I was doing a ton of listening and not a lot of talking. And then at one point he made a comment to me about believing that there's two kinds of women in the world, and there's women um, that are very career driven and ambitious, and then there's women who are really family oriented, and so they're not actually as career driven, and that
Yeah.
he could tell I was the latter. And I remember in that moment thinking, oh, he doesn't get me. Like, he doesn't get me.
Yeah.
I knew I've always been very ambitious professionally. I'd been planning on moving to LA for 10 years before I moved. I worked my butt off in the summers in college so I could pay for myself to move. I was financially independent. I was like making my way, in LA. And at the
Right.
time, yeah, thought I was gonna, work my way up to being a producer. And I just remember thinking like my purpose professionally feels very important to me. And so in that
Right.
moment, I remember this feeling in my gut that just like a ball in my stomach that just sank. And I thought, he's describing me how he wants me to be, not who I really am. He's not really
Yeah.
seeing me. And so I remember in that moment thinking, this isn't actually my person. And I was disappointed because I'd been really excited about the date, but I knew inside, like, this isn't my person. But then he went to ask me out on a second date. And instead of following my gut and saying, like, I just don't think we're really aligned, I don't think it's a fit, I said yes, because the thought that came up for me was, what if you're wrong? Like, what if you're wrong? This super successful guy, is coming to your life. He
Yeah.
picked you and wants to take you out, and he's so successful. And he was really, um, he was very, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Laying it on
Charming.
very thick. He was very like idealistic, very like painting this picture of how we could have this amazing
Mm.
love affair. Because how crazy it was that, he is the successful
Oh, yeah.
entrepreneur in his mid 30s, and I'm this 23-year-old part-time waitress, part-time PA, like that we happened to meet and we could have this great love story. And this was coming up on like our first, maybe second, but like very early on these dates. And so I started
Yeah.
doubting myself and thinking like, well, if he's seeing this and he's so successful and he's so much smarter and older and wiser than me, like maybe I'm just missing something. And of course, there was the piece too that it made me feel important. So anyway, we ended up getting into this 2 year long relationship. And once I ended up moving, I quit a film job that I was on. He was very big on wanting me to move quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, to move to his town and to live with him. And so I gave up my career. I moved to where he lived. And once I moved, I started to see a lot more of the toxicity. It was a very narcissistically abusive relationship. So verbally, emotionally, psychologically. Um, and I look back now and there were certain things that I almost, well, no, now I have a lot of compassion for it, but I'll say
Yeah.
that I'll just say at the time, I didn't even realize how unhealthy it was and how unfair it was, how cruel it was. I didn't even realize it because I was so sucked into the drama of all of it. And
Yeah.
in my experience, I was really put up on a high pedestal in the beginning,
Yeah.
and really I
Mm.
felt like the most desired, most incredible woman. And I did feel like, wow, this older, successful man who knows all these, like, again, pseudo celebrity kind of people. And like he, travels to Vegas at the drop of a hat, and we go to the Super Bowl and sit in box seats. And, we tour the Grand
Yeah.
Canyon in a helicopter, and, just this like crazy, larger than life kind of lifestyle. And so in the beginning, I just thought, like, wow, I just, had never felt more desired and more special. And then what I've
Think that's
realized,
something a lot of us can relate to as
mhm,
well, because maybe
mhm,
not the helicopter in the Grand Canyon or like going to the Super Bowl, but that I didn't realize, because I've known Alex for a while, for everyone listening, but I've never heard the details of this story
mhm,
in depth like this. But you and I, my story in
yeah.
very similar beginning with very similar details, except for the
Mm,
fact that he was lying to me about his age. So I didn't know about his age, but he was 10
mm,
years older than me. So very like
wow.
older, successful, laying it on very thick until they got you where they want you and secluded.
Right. And that was the piece I can see now. Again, it's like I just see it through such a different lens now and realize, like, oh, well, once I moved, I was in a much more vulnerable spot. I quit my job. I had no money coming in. I was living in his home. All of his friends, was my new
Yeah.
community. I didn't know people. And
Yeah.
so it's not surprising to me now, seeing in hindsight, that, oh, after I moved, that's when a lot started to shift. And I saw a lot more. I'm sure there were plenty of red flags before I moved, but I didn't see the depths of the viciousness that could occur, or the
Right.
yeah, just the way I got verbally attacked or put down. I hadn't experienced before I moved. Um, so it was a really difficult spot to be in when you feel so dependent on someone, or you feel like you no longer
Yeah.
have your sovereignty, your independence. And then from my experience and from what I understand with other women I've spoken to in narcissistic relationships,
Yeah.
you end up wanting to get back up onto that pedestal because you're knocked down. And then it's like, oh, well, now you feel like, well, what did I do wrong? Because he
Hmm.
used to have me up here on this pedestal. And so for me, it
Yeah.
was a really yeah, it was a very traumatic experience for me, of really going into just hating on myself, making myself wrong, feeling like things were my fault. And then I would turn around and sometimes see the truth of it, but then I'd be mad at myself that I was staying, or that I'd put up with it. So then I almost didn't want to see the truth of it, because it was like, well, I know this can't actually be that
B.
bad, because
Yeah.
I've been in this for 2 years. And so it was a really vicious cycle that fortunately eventually was broken.
Right. And that's the hardest part, is breaking it. I think, and for most women, it is that, like, you're financially vulnerable most of the time, and then you're not honest, 100% honest with yourself, because it's hard to grapple with, like you said, the fact that you've been in this situation and you don't want to accept that, like, you've let this happen to yourself. But there's also, when you were talking about the highs and the lows, for anyone listening and you're experiencing that, it's actually also, they do that subconsciously. I don't know if some people do it consciously or subconsciously, but they do it because it is causing chemical reactions in your brain to actually make you become addicted to it. It's
Mm,
like for anyone who's listening and they're just like going through this now, and that was something I didn't realize, that your brain is chemically becoming addicted to the chemical, I forget which chemical it is, like the serotonin and the happiness that's coming after the high. And then they stress you out so much that I think it's I forget which chemical it is when you're stressed and you're really on high alert and you're
Yeah.
basically in that survival mode and in that trauma mode.
Mhm.
And that eventually breaks down a part of your brain that affects your short-term memory, which then leads to being able to gaslight you more because it's
Mm,
all brain chemicals. And I didn't realize that when I was in my relationship. It's stuff I've learned through the journey of that's why they can gaslight you so much easier, is because they put you in those high conflict situations, and it's wearing down a lot of different parts of your brain because your brain's
mm,
not meant to be in that situation or in that fight state um, for that long. And it makes it just that much easier for them to gaslight you and say like, oh, well, you don't remember this and you don't remember this and
yeah, and
this isn't
twisting
how it
everything
is.
around.
And then you're
Mhm.
stuck in the cycle of, oh, what do I know is true? What is actually true? How do I know how to make these decisions? And then, they tell you like, you can't survive without me because they put you in such a vulnerable state. And then you really start to self-doubt yourself,
Yes.
and they prey
Yes.
on people pleasers, which you and I've had this conversation before. We both say we're like recovering people pleasers
Mhm.
because it is a journey, but you just want to feel loved and you want to make them feel loved because, you know, that's all you know how to do is the people pleasing up until that point.
Right. Right. And that speaks to what I said about how it also made me feel important. Right. So there was the
Yep.
doubting myself of like maybe I'm not seeing something. And then there was also this idea
Yeah.
of, well, sometimes I didn't feel great about myself. Like sometimes I questioned. So on one hand, I was having this success in LA and there was like, oh yeah, I broke into working on a couple big films and um I was starting to find my footing and I also was struggling financially. I, was waitressing part-time. I was trying to find
Yeah.
different roles on films. I struggled sometimes with my bills because, like I said, I was financially independent and I was working as a PA, which isn't a high paying job. And I had other
Yeah.
friends who graduated from college and were off, starting their engineering careers or their teaching careers or they were settling down or starting to get married and here I was like living this life in LA that none of my friends could relate to. So I think there was also this validation I found that, oh well,
Mm-hmm.
now I had this successful man who wanted me and it was validating to my life. But then when the switch happened, that was also the exact thing that would often get torn down or you know um
Mm-hmm.
I even, specifically remember one time him making a comment about like, what's wrong with me that I would fall for a 23-year-old waitress. And, so those kind of things that when he would say
Mm.
that, I'd think like, oh my gosh, like what, you know, maybe I'm not worthy. Like maybe I'm not, maybe I should be
Yeah.
really grateful that I have this opportunity to be with him. No, I didn't think that often. I mean, it was just an up and down. There were some times I'd have
Yep.
thoughts like that and other times where I would be so angry and think like you are so lucky to have me because I'm
Right.
putting up with this. So it was I mean, I had so much anger, I had so much doubt. Some days I also had this like gratitude and thinking again, I'd go back to feeling so lucky that I had this lifestyle with him and and I thought I loved him at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Which I can see now was more of that addiction. So as you said that really resonated. I believe it because that was my experience. And
Yeah.
I think for me, what was this huge turning point was that towards the end of our relationship, I personally believe all the stress I was experiencing had a huge negative impact on my physical health. And I ended up being very kind of out of the blue diagnosed with a tumor in my pancreas with cancerous
Right.
tissue, is what I was told. And
Yeah.
so it wasn't like your typical pancreatic cancer by any means. It was incredibly rare. It was non-aggressive, but we didn't know that for a couple weeks. And so when I first got this diagnosis, I just remembered it was like this wake up call to really step back and look at my life. And I looked at it and
Yeah.
thought, gosh, I want to experience so much more love in my life. I know I have so much more significance and purpose, and I just knew where I was not it. And I could see how
Yeah.
much I didn't want to be in such a low place of like feeling so bad about myself all the time. And knowing that I had so much more impact I could make and that I could just be living um, in such a more thriving way. And so
Yeah.
that for me was actually this huge catalyst to really evaluate and say like, okay, I don't want this path I'm on.
Right.
And now I ended up staying as I went through the surgery and the recovery because I also was afraid of being alone at that time. But a few months later was when I finally got the strength to lead the relationship. And fortunately, my sister was very encouraging to me and helped me finally
Yeah.
put my foot down and say, I'm done with this.
Right. And then after you left that relationship, how long was it before you were like, okay, I'm going to start this business? Or kind of was that ending the relationship, the health scare and like the eye-opening awakening, is that what also prompted you to say like, okay, I'm ready to,
Mhm.
do something different? Because I know you had
Yeah.
two different businesses at one point. You're now
Mhm.
solely focused on the business and success coaching, which is
Mhm.
a is amazing business. Both businesses were amazing, but what was that part of
Thanks.
the turn into that chapter?
Yeah. So yes, I decided when I ended the relationship, I wasn't going to go back to LA and get back into film. I wanted to find something that felt a lot more purposeful, impactful, significant. So I moved back to Pittsburgh and I knew that I
Yeah.
wanted to do something. I think that was when I started to feel like once I got out of the relationship and a couple months, I'd say later of I did some really intense therapy work and was
Yeah.
starting to kind of dabble in personal development. I started watching Oprah, reading at Jan Van Sant, and I was just looking for anything to help me like pick up the broken pieces. And so
Right.
I started thinking, I am actually really capable. Like, and I do have a heart to make an impact. And I was told for so long in some ways I was told I was like very capable, in other ways then during the angry like downs was told how incapable I was. And so I started to feel like, oh my gosh, I really am capable of more. I just didn't know what the more was. I knew I wanted more, but I didn't
Hmm.
have a vision for it. So I actually ended up working in nonprofit for a couple years. So I was trying to find like what my purpose was. And through that, I learned a lot about leadership. And that's where I really started to see how much I enjoyed mentoring people. So then I started my coaching business
Yeah.
a couple years later. So I think for me, it was more a lack of clarity of what I wanted to do. I remember actually when I started at the nonprofit telling my boss that I didn't see this as my forever role, that I thought maybe I wanted to start my own nonprofit, maybe a business, but
Right.
it's like I just didn't have the clear vision yet. So
Yeah.
from doing that and discovering how much I enjoyed mentoring and helping other people, and as I was starting to pursue and see more of my potential, I realized how much I wanted to help other people do that. So it was
Yeah.
all connected on the journey.
Right.
But when I started the business, it took me into a much deeper personal growth journey because coaching is all about growth
Yeah.
and personal development on top of learning how to do business or whatever kind of coaching you're doing. So it's about the strategy piece, but all coaching also ties into your growth, your development, your confidence.
Yeah.
So I started studying that a lot for myself. And that's also where I came to see that I had healed um, through the work I'd done up to that point, but there was still more healing to be done. And I
Yeah.
started to see there that while I had found compassion. I actually had found some compassion for my ex and realizing that he had his own demons, his own wounds, his own things, to sort through. And so I ended up really like finding forgiveness for him and for myself. But what I didn't realize was that as I was forgiving myself, I was also still attaching blame because for forgiveness to
Yeah.
occur, you have to say, well, there was something worthy of condemning in order to forgive.
Hmm.
And so I ended up actually through this personal growth work and this deeper healing journey realizing that, oh, I didn't actually have to forgive myself. I needed to find compassion for myself because I was doing the absolute best I could with the knowledge, the skills, the awareness that I had at that time.
Yeah.
And I was a 23-year-old young woman who
Yeah.
was just trying to make her way and doing her best and had no clue what narcissistic relationships even meant. I mean, I knew nothing about narcissism. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I was doing the best I could. And when I look back and now I can just have so much compassion for myself. Like before I used to say, I can't believe I let myself put up with what I put up with or stay as long as I did, but I forgive myself. And that was the first stage of healing
Mhm.
for me. The second stage was, oh, I do believe why, or I can see why I did it. I do believe that I put up with that stuff because I was doing my absolute best and I was really struggling with a lot of self-doubt. I didn't know how to trust myself.
Yeah.
So I just have a lot of compassion that I didn't know how to follow my intuition. I knew on our first date that it wasn't aligned. I knew multiple times, many times when we'd have
Mhm.
fights or I'd experience this toxicity and I stayed because I didn't know any better. I didn't know how to trust myself.
Right.
And what a journey that put me on to now cultivating such great self-trust. I'm still growing in, it's a process, but
Oh yeah.
I'm now actually have found gratitude for the experience because it helped me go on this journey of self-trust.
Yeah, I share very similar sentiments of the blame and, you feel like you have to blame yourself. A lot of women and men, I don't want to like say that men can't go through this because they do, and you blame yourself for not seeing, and you wish you would have caught the red flags, or you wish you would have done this. And I still struggle with like, I feel like there's so many moments in the relationship where I'm like, I wish I would have done this differently, but I have to like catch myself and say, you did the best with what you had, like you said, the compassion. Um, but then there comes a point where you feel not, I don't feel, I'm not sure I'm at the point of being grateful yet, but I
Mm,
do see there's some points where I'm like, I know I had to go through this to get me where I am. And I'm very thankful for where I am now.
mm,
Of, I understand why it had to happen. Not had to happen, but why it did happen for my life to turn out the way it is. So I know a
yeah.
lot of women, if you're listening, you can get to that point. It feels like you're filled with anger and you're filled with the
Mhm.
hurt, but you can take steps to heal yourself and create a life for yourself that you want to live and enjoy living. And um, I just would love to dig a little deeper into how you started to be able to trust yourself more, because this is something
Mhm.
Alex and I have worked on in the past when we worked together, of people pleasing, the self-doubt. I kind of alluded to that earlier, but now is
Mhm.
like a great time to dig deeper into how can women, and how did you overcome the self-doubt and the people pleasing a little bit? I know it's a lot because it took many years for you to come through that, and you're still working on it, as we all are, because like
Right.
I'm still a work in progress as well.
Right. We all are.
But we all are, and it's continuous improvement. That's something I talk about for operations, and it matters for your every part of your life. You don't need to make these big changes because it's harder to stick with them. You can't make this radical big change. You need to build the habits and the mindset around it. Sorry, I went off on a tangent after
That's
asking the
okay.
question, so I'll let you answer the question of overcoming that self-doubt and being able to trust our gut, because that is something so many survivors struggle with.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate hearing your thoughts about it too, Emma. I'm glad you're sharing. And it is so important to stress that it's a journey, right? And so,
Right.
this for me has been a 10-year journey. And there
Right.
are plenty of other things I had to look at where I didn't trust myself. And so it's been a process. The relationship was a very significant experience where I ended up experiencing a lot of negativity from that lack of self-trust. Um, but it's a journey and it's a process. And so with rebuilding the self-trust, the first thing I want to say, and I think this is really important too, is that one thing I did do, which is why I say it was the first stage of healing, but then I realized I had a deeper dive, was that in some ways I was trying so hard to get to forgiveness and compassion,
Yeah.
and forgiveness for him and for me, that I also bypassed a little bit of all
Mm.
the emotional expression that was happening. And not that, I mean, I certainly cried and got angry the whole first year after I ended it and moved home and, was finding my way. But I didn't
Yeah.
really like let myself fully go into the depths of seeing how what I was so angry about was how I didn't trust myself, how I,
Yeah.
betrayed myself. I betrayed my soul, I betrayed my body. And so that's where a lot of the anger was lying, was that I didn't stand up for myself. And so, like I
Mm.
said, I, in the first stage, went through some of the processing of it, but then there was like this deeper dive when I really started focusing on the self-trust piece. And so I think the most important things were looking at the areas where I was hiding, where I was people pleasing, and where I was stuffing. So, stuffing like what I really wanted, or what I really believed, or my truth,
Yeah.
or my desires, because I was still in this habit pattern of often second guessing and making myself wrong. So, for instance, even wanting to start my business, I wanted to go full
Yeah.
time with my business probably 2 years before I did. And I
Right.
had this big vision for it. Like once I got clarity that I wanted to do the coaching, within a year, I was ready to like go for it, but then I kept second guessing. I kept talking myself out of it. And I would start to say, or believe it was selfish to leave a nonprofit job to go just do my own thing. It was selfish to want to
Mm.
make more money. It was selfish to have this big dream. Or maybe it was just crazy to think that I could be this thought leader, or this, woman who's making a great impact, that I could run a company with multiple employees and, have
Yep.
clients and just have that kind of success. Um, and I even too would take, because my ex had, this very successful entrepreneur lifestyle himself, I would take that and make that wrong sometimes and think, well, if I make a lot of money and I'm an entrepreneur, what if I just become
Mm-hmm.
unfulfilled and unhappy? And, or, I experienced a lot
Yep.
of, I'll say just not healthy environments when I lived there. So it's like, that's the view I started to have. And I'd end up talking
Yep.
myself out of what I wanted. And all of that broke trust with myself, because I was denying what I actually really desire, what I want. I was denying prioritizing myself. So leaning into,
Mm-hmm.
where am I people pleasing? Where am I hiding? Where am I not giving myself permission to go after what I want, to own what I want, to own like,
Yeah.
what do I really desire? Like what turns me on in life and business, romantically?
Yes.
Like what do I
Yes.
actually really want? And setting standards for that and saying, like, I'm not settling for less than what I want. And I'm not going to
Yeah.
question it and believe that maybe I'm wrong. Because what if I'm wrong was the number one question that led to me betraying my intuition. So is that answering your question in terms of that was
Yes.
like my number one focus, was removing the people pleasing, the second guessing, and allowing myself to own what I want. And I applied it to my relationships as well. And it's how I wound up,
Right.
with my husband, who I now have a wonderful relationship with,
Yeah.
from not settling as well.
Which it, and it, like you said, it's not an overnight fix to just like, I want all this, I'm gonna go for it, like there are moments where you feel really good about it, and then like it's keeping up with it. At least that's what I found in like the past year. Cause like at the beginning of the year, I felt really good. And then there's moments like in days that I feel really good, but then it's like those struggles hit, or like I had the postpartum, mindset hidden, or like, and that went on for months of like not feeling like myself. And it's hard to get yourself back out of like that cycle. You put yourself into this like beating yourself up, and like, and then getting out of it is very difficult. But the things you desire aren't going to come without a struggle. I was listening to a book recently and I wrote down the quote, and I think it applies here, is failure is a mindset. We can feel like we failed ourselves. We can feel like, or think that we failed ourselves, or we can think this. And that's something I think, like you said, you're angry at yourself for not doing something. So you feel like a failure. You feel like something. that's your mind, like that mindset is what's keeping you there. You have to persevere when things get hard, and that's your subconscious. Like you and I have talked about that before. It's the fear is what's trying to keep you safe because you've never gone there before. Oh, I don't know if you froze.
Yeah, so I agree completely about the failure being a mindset and or mistakes. And I think that's one of the biggest things that can bring up second guessing or doubt is this fear of making mistakes of like, I have to get it right or I have to not get it
Mhm.
wrong. That was a huge thing for me. I was always trying to avoid getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And so that would keep me stuck in these unhealthy situations or not following what I wanted. But I think what I would propose, a slight tweak in what you shared, is that yes, creating what you want, what you desire can never come without mistakes. So I would say without mistakes,
Yes.
without challenges, without setbacks. I heard you say
Mhm.
without struggle. And for me, I define struggle, or I believe struggle occurs based on the meaning we give things. So
Right.
experiencing mistakes or challenges doesn't have to be a struggle or really difficult or really painful. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they
Right.
are, and it's okay. I'm all about processing your pain, allowing your emotions, all of it. And it's the making the mistakes wrong or assigning failure to mistakes, that mindset that makes it such
Yeah.
a struggle to create what you want.
Yeah. I think I
Right.
should clarify too. It was the struggle of like me mentally struggling to just change the mindset habits or like addressing those discomforts and those truths within myself in the past year. So I should have
Yeah.
clarified that. Like it's a struggle in the sense of business and what you're doing. It doesn't always have to be this hard thing. And like you said, mistakes aren't mistakes, they're a lesson learned.
Mhm.
Um, but I think my struggle was letting myself live through instead of just being so much like my plan has to go this way and just like
Yeah.
enjoying, not maybe enjoying the journey or being present in this journey of growth.
Yeah.
I think is a better way to put it. Like you said, like
Yeah.
it doesn't have to have that negative connotation.
Right, right. Because when you embrace it as a lesson to be learned, right, it changes the experience of it, and accepting that it doesn't all have to turn out exactly how you think it will. That's the part of
Yeah.
embracing faith and embracing being surrendered to life and to what's happening versus trying to control it. And I think the number one thing that wants us to go into control, or this fear of not making mistakes and the fear of
Yeah.
getting it wrong, all ties into your subconscious mind just wanting to keep you safe and comfortable. And we've talked about this a lot before, Emma, but for those who are listening,
Yeah.
your subconscious, it's formed between age 0 and 7, and it's that's an age where you don't have intellect yet, so you don't have the ability to reason, you don't question, you just kind of absorb and soak in everything you're told like a sponge. And so you pick up a lot of your fears, or most of your fears and limiting beliefs or core wounds during those ages, and they're
Yeah.
passed down to you. But they're not fears you were actually born with, because you're only born with two fears: falling and loud noises. And so
Yep.
yeah, so the fears are all learned. And the number one job of those fears and your subconscious is to keep you in the comfort zone, because
Yeah.
its job was to keep you surviving and safe and approved of. And so that's where I think it's really important to recognize as you're exploring growing in self-trust and healing, is that your subconscious and those fears, they're not something you have to battle or feel bad about or hate on yourself for, beat
Mhm.
yourself up for. It's just there to keep you safe, and it's just learned habit patterns. And so what's
Right.
important is just becoming aware of them so you can step back and observe them and look at, okay, what's fear versus what is the truth of my, like what's actually in alignment with me.
Right. Can you still hear me? Can I still hear
I
you?
can, your video's frozen, but I can still
My
hear you.
videos. Okay. I can,
Okay, you're
okay.
back now.
As long as you're okay, you're back now too. I would say I would agree with that, that like that fear is meant to keep you there and keep you stuck, but it it's just noticing and being observant of when it's coming up. And I think like this is, people undervalue the journaling piece, and I do too sometimes, where I'm like, I am too busy to write today, or I'm too busy to like, but jotting it down when you notice it, and like how can you reframe that, is really impactful, even if it's just, it seems so simple, but it's the simple things that can make the biggest tweaks for you. And that, why am I afraid? Why am I, Zach and I have gotten into this habit of like, I will just like word vomit to him of like this is all the reasons I'm scared. And he's like, well, is that actually the worst case scenario? Because that's what we're all afraid of, is the worst case is not as actually as bad as we think it is.
Right.
Usually.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned that about the journaling, Emma, because, like I mentioned before, how I had bypassed some of the piece of expressing like my anger, or really looking at the truth. And I teach this to my clients as well, that thinking is not actually expressing. Expressing comes from writing or from verbalizing things, or going out and like you can physically express too, right? And so, but just in your mind isn't expressing. And so the journey to more trust does require you trusting in your maybe not trusting, let me think of how I want to say it, of you owning that it's okay for you to express, right? Valuing your expression and allowing it to come out. So I love that you shared that piece, because it's so important to write it, or to look at it, to bring it to the surface so you can see the truth of it.
And if you don't have time for journaling, like you said, you have to express it some way. I've started, like, if I'm in the car thinking about stuff and I'm like, I really want to like let this out or jot it down, don't have a piece of paper, I box it to myself. Like I voice message it to myself. You could, sit on Zoom by yourself and record it. If you're like, I don't have the hands, because that's usually my problem. Like, got a baby in my hand or something in my hand, and I can't sit down and write right now. So for anyone listening, if you're like, I don't have time for that, or I don't want to do that, there's other ways, like Alex said, to express this that can really change it. Because when you're in your own head, it's different. Like even saying it out loud sometimes is so different than just thinking it, like you said. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm same. I'll use voice memos on my phone quite a bit to just talk something through, because even exactly you verbally hearing it, or you audibly hearing it instead of just spinning in it, it helps you just really look at the truth of it more.
Right. And you can go back to it later and re-listen. Like you said, it's like some people just process it differently in that sense of, you can make something work internally in your head. Like you can play it back and forth. I feel like, especially when you're struggling with trusting yourself and, what's fear and what's not fear. So especially when you're coming out of those situations of trauma, of building that trust. And the only way you're going to build trust with yourself. And you can like tell me and how you felt about this, because I think a lot of what we've talked about is kind of leaning into it, but just saying it more clearly is like, you slowly deteriorated that trust with yourself. And the only way you're going to get that trust back is through like little things and little actions, like just like we do with everyone else. I built like, and I'm sure you and Adam I know your story, not everyone does, who's watching, but you guys had to build back a lot of things in your relationship, and you worked on a lot of things. And I know not all of it stemming from the abusive relationship, but just like coming through your journey of being who you are and being who you want to be. And you build a relationship of trust with your other people. You have to do it with yourself, of like, I'm going to trust myself to do this. Like you can start small, and like you're going to just start listening to your gut in small ways of, I don't know, like maybe you can provide a better example. I can't think of one off the top of my head that's like a small thing of like building that trust with yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, it definitely, well, I always say this, how you do anything is how you do everything. So
Yep.
if you're still people pleasing, stuffing, hiding in all the little places, it's going to be really
Yep.
hard to show up, and I teach this to my clients, right? To show up as your bold, authentic, unapologetic self in the big places, right? Or in the more public places or in the scarier places. So
Yep.
yeah, on my journey, it definitely, and there were definitely some big leaps I took. And then there was also looking at all of the little things. And Adam is actually, our relationship's a great, um, has great examples. And it was a place I really actually started when I went into like this deeper phase of my own personal growth journey, was looking at where I was people pleasing him. And it was simple things like him wanting to go to a Mexican restaurant and spicy food doesn't agree with me, and me being like, I'm just not feeling that tonight, but like, oh, but I don't want him to think I'm like rigid, or I don't want to be a pain,
Hmm.
so I just agree, okay, let's just go eat there. And that's such a small
Oh, yeah.
example, right? Or such a small thing, and it was so easy to say like, oh, it's not a big deal, it's not a big deal. But the message I'm sending to myself is, it's not okay for you to express what you actually want, and what you
Hmm.
want isn't a big deal. What you really feel or your truth, it's not a big deal. So I heard that all the time. Not a big deal, not a big deal. So yeah, there were, I
Yeah.
mean, many different little places like that I went looking in my marriage of where I was people pleasing or stuffing. Um and then in turn too, it was also looking at where was I um being controlling or critical because, well, I wanted things, to be my way. And I think coming out of my relationship was definitely a big part of it. And then also just other different experiences from childhood to through adulthood. I had
Yeah.
such a fear of letting go of control. I wanted to control everything because I'm afraid, or was afraid, of making mistakes and afraid of getting it wrong. And so that
Yeah.
would spill over with Adam of little things like, are you sure you want to wear that pair of jeans tonight? Like, are you sure you want to grow your hair out? Like, oh, I really love your hair when it's shorter. And those are small
Uh,
examples, but I came to really see the truth of like, that's all just me being controlling and trying to, and it would stem
right.
into stuff with his work sometimes too. And, well, do you want to take today to work on sales? Or, oh, maybe if you called this guy again. And it's like, he wasn't asking for my help or my opinions about his work. I was
Mm-mm.
just inserting myself because of the whole mentality of like, well, you should know better, I should know better, and we've got to make
Yeah.
sure we don't make any mistakes, or just that fear of the unknown, right? Just fear of not being in control. So those were the
Hmm.
two key places I looked in my personal relationship, was not people pleasing, not stuffing, and also letting go of control so I could embrace the truth of who Adam really is. And when I step back and look at the truth of Adam, I love the truth of who Adam is. I think it's sexy. He grows his hair out and he wears whatever he wants to wear, right? And he says whatever he wants to say. My husband's very bold and
I'm
unapologetic.
laughing because
And
I know Adam and I've
yes,
met Adam in
yes.
person. I actually just saw him. I didn't say hi to him because he was across the parking lot, but I did see him the other day picking up Stella because I was
Oh,
picking up
okay.
Charlotte and he was like all the way because the buildings are separate. But I was like, oh,
Sure.
that's so funny. But yeah, he does wear
Oh, that's great.
his grown out hair. It just like makes me smile because he rocks it with such confidence, like he does
He does,
not
because
care.
he does not care what anyone
Nope.
else thinks of it. He
Nope.
wears what he wants. And yeah, so there's something sexy, there's something attractive about owning your authentic expression and not caring what other people think. And so to bring it full circle, like you said, looking at all those little places where you're people
Right.
pleasing or hiding, it all goes together. And so the more I started to shift in the little ways, the more confident I
Hmm.
felt then in the bigger ways. And so, like, putting myself out there with my business and being more bold about my message, making,
Yeah.
investments in my business and taking leaps and risks and making decisions to say, like, I'm all in for what I want and I'm going for it, got easier and easier the more I allowed who I am to be okay and to be welcome.
Right. And I think just something that came up while you were saying that is I think a lot of women and men who go through this, because their abuser tells them like no one will love you. That's something I struggled with, or no one's gonna accept you. Like, especially in my case, there was baggage, or like I was damaged goods is how I was labeled, and that no one was gonna love me. And obviously now I have a loving partner, I have a loving family, everything is very different. But when you're in those deep moments of no one's gonna love me and like no one's gonna find me attractive if I'm my authentic self, I think is something people struggle with.
Mhm.
Which I would just say, that's your mind. Like that's like a good concrete example, I feel like, of your mind telling you something that's not true. You believe
Yes.
it's true, but it's not. If you look at it like almost logically, there are, I don't even know how many billion people, you will, and then having going back to the faith of it will happen and letting life play out may not happen how you think it's going to play out. So letting go of that control of it's going to happen when I want it to happen. No, it's
Mhm.
going to happen when you're ready for it. And
Mm.
to be ready for it, like you said, is going back into you have to be able to love yourself. You have, like, no one's going to love you in the right way if you can't love yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, well, how how people will value you, treat you, right? It all, yes, begins within you. And
Yep.
how you treat yourself, how you value yourself. And I agree completely. And I see this actually with a lot of women I work with. I see it with other women who have had toxic relationships, that fear of being seen. And that fear of
Yep.
if I'm seen for who I really am, will I really be accepted or loved, or am I worthy of being seen? And that was something I definitely have worked through and continue to grow in as you go to next levels. And so again, I stress this is a journey. It's a process. It's not like you have to have everything just completely, solved and
Right.
fixed or healed overnight. It's a journey,
Yeah.
and it can be a journey to embrace and to enjoy when you're willing to shift it from as I say that, I want to be clear that once again, it also can have a lot of anger and a lot of
Oh yeah.
frustration and all that processing to do. So it's not to negate the struggle or the anger or any of that. And I say this as an encouragement, and this was my experience, that when you decide to make a shift into embracing the journey as an adventure, because it's a journey of
Yeah.
self-love, it's a journey of valuing yourself more, of trusting yourself again, that can be, a really sweet, tender, precious adventure
Right.
when you remove all the blame and making yourself wrong and the judging yourself, for what you
Right.
experienced. And so as you remove that judgment, that's the number one piece to allowing yourself to lean into knowing you can be seen, that you're
Yeah.
worthy of being seen. I personally believe we're all created by God. We're all created, like I said at the beginning, with greatness. I believe you
Yeah.
were created to be magnificent, miraculous, and a cherished being. And so you are worthy of being seen.
Right. And I think you were the one who told me this when we started working together, was it's just a statement that I think many people need to hear is you have this like big scary what if, but then on the other hand, like you said, what if you do all this and what's the greatest thing that could happen? What's like the best life you can live? And letting yourself think and be in that thought of
Mm.
what if I achieve everything or have these people who see me, like how fulfilled are you going to feel and happy are you going to be? And we did an exercise in a networking event of just talking about for 4 minutes what you truly desire and just like letting yourself no limit, just what do you desire? And like one woman was like, this sounds silly, but I desire like nicer underwear or something. Like, as women, like it doesn't have to be complicated. And those are like the little things you can do for yourself and bring yourself that
Mhm.
happiness. It doesn't have to be the big house or the big whatever that insert
Yeah.
big whatever here. It could simply be like for mine was like I desire 5 minutes by myself.
Mm.
Like,
I
because
feel that as a mom of a 14-month-old, I feel that. I
it can
understand.
be, I was like, I just want to enjoy my cup of coffee with no one talking to me.
And not being responsible for anyone else
Yeah,
but yourself.
yeah.
Yeah, it's about whatever's true for you.
Right.
What do you actually really desire? When you remove the shoulds, again, the trying to not get it wrong or to get it right, or it should be this or should be that, and allow just what's true for you to come out, it's
Yep.
it's so much more enjoyable.
And then you don't wait. I feel like it is, you don't waste time with people if you're pretending to be something you're not, and you're not wasting time with people who aren't a good fit, personally, professionally,
Mm-hmm.
if you're just open about it and unapologetic about it, which is obviously a work in progress. It's never going to be perfect. And
Yeah.
your what you want is going to shift as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
and who you
I
are.
I agree totally. And I say this to all my clients that your people will be drawn to who you really are. And that
Yeah.
applies if you're a business owner, it applies in relationship, it applies with friends. I mean, in your career, your people will be drawn to who you really are, and
Yeah.
vice versa.
And it's okay if it takes a little bit longer than you plan. If like it's not going to be overnight. It took me over a year, I think, to be able to share my story, or like have that connection, or being able to put it into words. Took a lot of time behind the scenes to be able to come up with and piece together, like, even this YouTube series of, like, I had been so called and drawn to, like, helping women or creating a platform for women. And I way overcomplicated it. It didn't have to be complicated, and it didn't. And then I just said, screw it. It doesn't have to make sense with my business. I'm just going to do it. It doesn't have to be like how everyone in the coaching, or not coaching, but like online or marketing space says, like, you need one thing, you need this, and I'm like, I'm just going to do it because I feel called to do it. It
Yeah,
doesn't
you
have
followed
to
your
make sense.
passion, your inspiration. I love it. I love
And
that.
that it came through, and it had that clarity for me that, like, was able to tie this personal thing that I loved into my business. So I think that's just a great example for people to, you know, you're going back to the mistake thing. It's not, it's just you're getting more clarity at
Mhm.
every step.
Yeah, and just keep leaning in. Keep leaning in.
Yep.
One of my mentors said this to me once. It was really helpful for me. David Nagel said to me once that whenever you set a big goal and a deadline, if you don't hit it, don't change the goal, change the time frame.
Yeah.
And in the way he said that, it was really helpful because, as you know, I'm also a I'll say recovering overachiever personality type. And so that was helpful for someone like me because it was easy, to beat myself up if I
Mhm.
didn't hit this goal, or to even be afraid to set big goals because, well, what if I didn't hit them? And so again, you remove that fear and the what if I don't do it, the fear of mistakes, what if I get it wrong, and just say, you know what, I'm going to set this goal. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to follow my passion, my intuition, and my inspiration, and just go for it and lean in.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work out in the exact time frame you think it will, okay, just change the time frame and just keep
Yep.
going for it, and embrace the
Exactly.
journey. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey
No, exactly. I think,
and who you become in the process.
and I would like to add, just because that is something that resonated and still I hear every day almost with building my business since we work together, is, you know, you have to enjoy the journey, and you don't have to, but you should, like, going back to the burnout thing of the habits that you're building while you're getting to the destination are going to be still there when you get to that destination. It doesn't change magically, of
Yes.
the late nights or the burning yourself out, or, those, like you said, the small things are going to be what show up when you get to that big destination.
Right.
So it does you
Right.
no value pushing
Right.
harder.
I've experienced this lesson multiple times, multiple times. That and a different mentor of mine, actually, Sloan, used to say, how you feel on the destination or how you feel on the journey is how you'll feel on the destination. And so
Yeah.
speaks to everything you just said. And I couldn't agree more. And so how you embrace and experience the journey is so important. And that's why
Yeah.
cultivating that self-trust, self-kindness, compassion, and embracing your authenticity and owning I'm allowed or I'm worthy of being seen. Yeah, I'm allowed to be seen. I'm worthy of being seen.
Yeah.
That all of that is the most beautiful part of the journey. And it also has the greatest impact on you creating what you want and building your life in a
Yeah.
way that's in alignment, with who you are.
Exactly. And you don't use um these constructs that you've come up with, this time frame you've come up with, this idea that you've come up with, be like a way to beat yourself up. I've seen that a lot this year, and I've done it myself, is, you know, like you said, with the goal and changing the timeline, you set the deadline. You can change it again. There's no reason to use it. We had a training, and the woman said this because I was using my schedule and not completing my weekly goals as a reason to feel defeated. And I was using it as a negative, when I'm like, I'm not giving myself grace because I'm juggling so much.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I need to adjust that my capacity isn't what it used to be prior to having Lila. It's a whole different game.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's part of the looking at it with self-compassion piece, and looking at like, where am I putting too much on myself? You know, where do I need to be more supported, or to change things up, to make it a more enjoyable journey.
Yes. I have loved all of this. I don't want to cut us off, but I do have to cut us off at some point. And
no problem. I actually have a call. Yep, that I gotta hop off onto now too.
Thank you so much, Alex. Everyone, if you want to learn more about Alex, connect with Alex. All of her links will be in the description below. And where can everyone find you too? That you would like to.
Yeah, I mean, we can connect through my website, alexpursglove.com, or Instagram is one of my preferred places to connect. I'd love to hear, for anyone who listened, what you took away from it. You know, I just love to hear, what were your key takeaways? Was there anything you related to? I love to have conversations and learn more, you know, about people who listen. So, or who've listened to this. So yeah, reach out. Love to have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Alex. This has been an amazing conversation today. Everyone who's watching, I hope there is one big takeaway that you have, or aha moment that you've had. You can share it in the comments below. And like Alex said, feel free to reach out to her. She's a great resource, and her content is also just very authentic, eye-opening, and go check it out.
Thanks for having me, Emma. So much fun being here talking to you today.
Thank you so much.